think we are live. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Hello. Welcome to History Chats this afternoon. Great. So, yeah, welcome to History Chats. We're going to get started in a couple minutes here. Thanks for joining us. As always, if you're watching the recording after the fact, you're not live. We're gonna just kind of hang out for about 4 minutes or so, 3-4 minutes, to let people get a chance to join. So you can skip ahead if you're watching the recording. But if you're joining us live, welcome. Yeah, we'll get started in just a couple minutes. That's close enough. While we're waiting, let me tell you about some stuff that's coming up. Let's see here. So our History Speaks series, usually we've been doing this year at the end of the month on a Saturday, but because of the proximity to Veterans Day, we're going to be doing it a little early this year. So this is actually coming up pretty quickly here on the 6th of November. We're going to be having Pamela Fullerton, I think. Yeah, she is the sister of Scott Elwyn, who was a Vietnam War era piloted helicopters in that conflict, and she is going to talk about her brother and his extraordinary career in that regard, and his character and the legacy he left behind. And I think her continuing efforts to try to document and keep that story alive. So that's going to be an interesting talk, I'm sure. I just having chatted with her a little bit to get the details. She's got some great stories, and it'll be a really interesting look at an area that we don't talk about as much. The Vietnam War. It's kind of contemporary. But anyway, that'll be at 2 o'clock on Saturday, November 6th. So you can come out and watch that live if you want to. Speaking of stuff coming up, next month is, as I said, to kind of coincide with the veterans theme. We are going to continue our month-long theme here, People You Should Know, and specifically talk about some veterans. So we're going to do Veterans You Should Know. So we're going to start with Bennett Moulter. Then we're going to have Bill Hayes on the 11th. And then on the 18th, we're going to feature the story of Lawrence Bellow. And we're going to have a representative from he's a Spencer area veteran of the Korean War, I believe. And Ron from the Spencer Area Historical Society is going to be joining us for that to get a little bit of, some another area of the county we don't necessarily talk about as much. So we're going to get an expert there and learn a little bit about the Spencer Area Historical Society as well. So yeah, that'll be an interesting month of military history in various different ways. So looking forward to that. And before we get started, thanks again to our sponsor, Yankee Bookstore, for sponsoring History Chats and History Speaks both this year, as well as all of our members that make it possible for us to do this. So thank you to you and to them. And yeah, if you're interested in becoming a sponsor or becoming a member, just feel free to reach out to us, visit our website, or just give us a call. Come on in. Okay. I think we're ready to get going here. Yeah, let's kick it off. So without further ado, here's Gary Gisselman. He's going to take it away here.
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, today we're visiting and talking about Mildred Barber Abel, who was a very important woman, very important person in the history of Marathon County. And we'll be telling that story as you may have viewed in past history chats. We visited with Helen Noem and a variety of other women who are very important in the history of Marathon County, telling a variety of different stories that all blend with our history. And Mildred's story blends a couple different stories that we'll also tell about. So, Mildred Barber Abel, born January 1902 in Greenwood, Clark County, Wisconsin, to Dr. Joseph and Ella Barber. She, in 1906, the Barber family moved to Marathon City. On the far left, you might see a drugstore that has that cross on and a sort of spelling out drugs maybe. And Dr. Barber also ran a drugstore in downtown Marathon City. So this became the home to the Barbers pretty much for the rest of their lives here in Marathon City. After early schooling in Marathon City, Mildred graduated from the Edgar High School. At this time, Marathon City did not have a high school, so Mildred had to find her way across the town of Castle to Edgar for her high school education. And then after she graduated, she attended the normal school at Stevens Point, I believe graduating about 1920. She then taught for a little bit at the Washington Heights School in the town of Hamburg, up in the town of Hamburg, up in northwestern Marathon County for a couple years. But then a couple different things were happening in the 1920s that really changed the whole history of the 1920s, as well as some other things that we'll talk about. But one of the major things that launched us into the 1920s was the 19th Amendment, giving the right to the vote to women. So that sparked a lot of different political, as well as social, as well as cultural ramifications throughout Marathon County and throughout Wisconsin, and of course throughout the United States. And it came to be a part also of Marathon County's history. If you look at Helen Ohm's story chat a while ago, elected to the Wausau City Council because of that. So the significance of this with regard to the history of women, specifically in Marathon County, is really an important part of this. And I wanted to make mention that this was a key element driving us and moving us into the 1920s. Another part of the 1920s, sort of coming after Robert La Follette's governorship in the early 1900s, was the whole role of La Follette progressivism in Wisconsin. Robert La Follette and his progressive ideals started basically in the 1900s when he was governor, carried through the 1910s, upset a little bit by World War I. It threw progressivism off a lot in Wisconsin. The war, the German element, the Norwegian element, really changed the history of that progressive movement in Wisconsin quite a bit. But then, but after the war, 1920, things started to settle down a little bit, and the reform era of Robert La Follette carrying on the progressive movement was not as strong as it was earlier before the war, and it wasn't going to be as strong as it was when Franklin Roosevelt became president in 1932. But the whole element of La Follette's progressivism, we'll see that manifested in the history that we say today. It's very important. Researchers and historians are debating to this day exactly what the role of progressivism in the 1920s was all about. But I think we can point that it was at least a little bit of alive here in Marathon County. So I want to back up a little bit, talk a little bit about Mildred's father, Dr. Joseph Barber. He was elected to the Wisconsin State Senate in 1922 and 1924. He later went on to serve in the Wisconsin Assembly and also served many years on the Marathon County Board of Supervisors. So he was quite an active a political person in addition to being a doctor, serving a lot of clients throughout western Marathon County out of Marathon City, but a very important person and a very important person statewide. This is an earlier article that Dr. Barber appointed by Governor McGovern to the State Health Board. So going just to show that even before he was in the state Senate, Dr. Barber was really an important part of the politics of Wisconsin even earlier. But then in 1920, the lining up was for the election to the Republican National Convention. And then in the middle of this, we see Joseph Barber, La Follette progressive. So that's why it's important to understand Robert La Follette, what it meant to be a progressive. Just to see this standing alone, you have to understand that this was a larger movement in the Wisconsin's history, this La Follette progressivism, and Joseph Barber was a key part of that, especially in the 1920s. Joseph Barber then, like I say, was elected to the Wisconsin State Senate. This is from the Wisconsin Blue Book. He represented the 25th senatorial district, which at that time included Lincoln and Marathon counties. That's a larger electoral base from which you get elected. It talks a little bit about his biography here, which we won. But his district was both Lincoln and Marathon counties. We'll talk about the assembly districts in a couple minutes. So then we have Senator Barber in Madison, and then we now see that this is Mildred. Mildred went to Madison to be a part of Senator Barber's staff in Madison while he was in the Senate in the early days. And this is a picture of her. This was really taken from a picture in the newspaper comparing that they both were in Madison at the same time, but they were very close colleagues with each other before and after she was elected. So then we have Mildred, like I say, being a teacher, and then working for her father, and then eventually she became a candidate for the assembly for the first Marathon County district, which we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But again, as a La Follette Republican, so again, she's part of the Reformed movement in the early 1920s. And then this is just a member of the board of directors of the Athens Printing Company, a little testament by Frank Chesek with regard to Mildred running for the assembly. And then this is another one by the George Lippert, who was district attorney, noticing in 1924 that she is considering running, and that without any I am endorsing you. You are capable. You, like your father, Senator, would represent the people. You are the right on the questions confronting the people, and you are for the principles endorsed by Senator Robert La Follette. You deserve the support of the people of the Western District of Marathon County. Well, and then George Lippert went on endorsing Mildred for her run in 1924 for the assembly. And then a variety of different side stories with regard to Mildred. One was that if she would win, she would be her father would be in the Senate, and here she would be in the assembly. Just a little bit of a headline making note that I think this may have been the only father-daughter pair in the United States serving in the state capitals. And we're not just saying, should Miss succeed in obtaining the election, she will be probably the first woman member of the state legislature and will serve in the same session as her father. So she did win, and she was one of the 3 women legislators to serve in the Wisconsin legislature. This is also from the Wisconsin Blue Book, and it talks a little bit about her first district. At that time, Marathon County was split into 2 assembly districts, first district and the second district. The Mildred Barber's district was pretty much the western part of Marathon County, including all those towns, cities, and villages, pretty much on the western side of Marathon County. But then she was elected, and then some of the headlines started to come. This is an interview later on with Mildred as one of the first women legislators in the state assembly in 1924. So she got a lot of publicity. She was quite noted for her progressive and reform ideas. She was specifically attentive to prison rights, prison reform, women's health, a variety of other issues that were strong in the progressive reform era at that time. There were 3 other Wisconsin women legislators also elected, so Mildred wasn't alone. There were 2 others from Wisconsin that made history. That made history in that election of 1924. They went on to serve. One chose not. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they were there in the Wisconsin Assembly chambers, always comparing notes. I like this picture a lot because it really indicates the great camaraderie that these 3 women legislators had. They knew that they were making history. They knew they were there, and they knew that they had made history by being elected in 1924 and really being the three women legislators in the state of Wisconsin, and Mildred being one of them. But then soon thereafter, 2 years, the terms were just for the 2 years, and then by 1926, Mildred Barber was defeated for re-election. Helen Thompson, one of the other women, won the election, and the other one stepped down again. But Mildred was defeated in that election of 1926. We are not quite sure why. Some of the commentators and reporters are saying that she just didn't pay attention enough to the people back home. There's really no indication of why she was defeated, but we assume that maybe she wasn't taking care of the constituents back home. We're not quite sure. So she just had 1 term in the Wisconsin legislature. In 1926, she taught at the La Follette School up in the town of Hamburg. She married Otto Abel in 1928, went on to raise a family and live on Reuter Street for the rest of her life, pretty much, like I said, raising her family. Not involved in politics that we can see, teaching again a little bit after her assembly, but again, Mildred lived a very quiet life after her 1 term, but she was in the history books. She is in the history books. She is in the history books by being an indicator of the women's role in the 1920s after the 19th Amendment was passed. Also, key player in the La Follette progressive reform movement moving into the 1920s. A very significant person in the history of Marathon County, also a very significant person in the history of Wisconsin. So with that, I turn it back to Ben, but a very important person. And we remember Mildred, we remember Helen, and we remember a lot of other women who came forth in the 1920s to make this a better city, a better county, and a better state. So back to Ben. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an incredible person to kind of, again, being the bobbed-haired girl from Marathon City and making history there. Yeah, I guess if anybody has any questions, again, feel free to put those in the comment sections or what have you. Give you a little time here. I think one of the interesting things, because I did a little research into her when I was doing, Helen Olm's story, which we did a couple months ago. The other early woman representative here in Marathon County. One of the things that is kind of interesting is, and I don't know if you came across the actual election. You showed the ballots of the primary, but it's kind of like a foregone conclusion. That's the real competition. And then it was sort of, and I think when she was defeated in the primary, and then that was kind of it, which is kind of interesting.
But just carrying on with that, there were no Democrats, right? I mean, they were all Republicans. So if you won a primary, you were elected. If you lost a primary, that pretty much ended your career also, because there was hardly any trace of large Democratic voters at that time, pretty much Republicans and a variety of prohibitionists and a variety of other folks, but it was mostly at this time the La Follette progressives had a key player on the state level, not so much on the nonpartisan Wausau level, but certainly on the state level they were quite important.
Yeah, and it's interesting talking about politics during this period, because like you talked about how we don't really understand why she wasn't elected, and some of the speculation is like has to do with banking regulations or just kind of like stuff. It's not like, oh, she was for this and everybody else didn't like that. It wasn't just because she was a woman, it was because of other sort of nebulous things. You have, like you said, the prohibition is a thing that, okay, how hard are we going to regulate that? And, it's kind of an interesting political landscape that it's hard to put yourself back in the shoes of someone back then. Yeah. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So I think maybe we'll call it there. As always, thanks for watching, and we will see you next time. For now embarking on Veterans You Should Know. So some kind of similar theme here, but we're going to be talking about a variety of different and some very interesting stories of servicemen here from Marathon County, or adjacent, I guess. We'll get into that next week. Anyway, have a wonderful week. We will see you next time.